Hi, everybody. So first off, I want to apologize for the fact that we're not having a seminar this evening. I misread the course calendar and thought that we were off from the 2nd to the 4th, which I guess was last year. I guess 22, 23, 24 are all on the same calendar, and I just missed that. So unfortunately, I had something that kind of came up as of tonight, or as of this evening. I realized, oh crap, we're supposed to meet on Sunday. I can't, unfortunately. So I'm going to do a pre-recorded lecture. Generally speaking, when I do these kind of pre-records, I try not to do them that often. And generally it's exceptional circumstances. I'm sick, I'm traveling, something's going on. But for tonight, I'm going to do something a little bit different. I know last week I said I was going to do that video. I'm just going to hold off, and we're just going to do that next week because I actually want to chat about it. And we may actually be able to have a little bit of a discussion of what I'm going to talk about tonight. Now, your readings for this week talked a lot about life course and traits and things like that. So I wanted to take a different approach on this and kind of go at it from an angle that I'm a little more familiar with. Reason being, my PhD is in criminology, but primarily I actually studied terrorism. That was like my major area of focus when I was getting my degree. That's what most of my publications are in on terrorism, particularly the far right. I've done a number of projects on this. I'm kind of a little more familiar with this, but I figured this would kind of be an interesting one to kind of think about life course and how people commit certain crimes throughout their life, and then whether they choose to do it continuously or choose to kind of filter out. And we'll kind of apply this back to a particular topic that is a little bit closer to me that I think you guys would actually find a lot more entertaining. Now, the first question I'm going to ask, and obviously I would pause and we would kind of have a discussion, is who's a terrorist? Now, ultimately, the overwhelming majority of people would say Osama bin Laden is a terrorist. He committed politically motivated violence in order to achieve some objective against a non-combatant population, right? Ostensibly. Now, Nelson Mandela is known as a freedom fighter against the South African apartheid government. However, when we actually compare these two men, it's very fascinating. Osama bin Laden was never formally convicted of any charges, ever, anywhere. He was never tried, never convicted. Meanwhile, Nelson Mandela actually was tried, convicted, and sentenced as a political terrorist in South Africa. Ironically, he then became their president after the apartheid government fell. But it's kind of an interesting example of when you look at the life history of a person, it is extremely easy for a person to go from one phase to the other. One switch, one major event could have resulted in Nelson Mandela actually being violent, some experience he had in his past, whereas Osama bin Laden could have just been a cleric his entire life and never went off on this vendetta against the West. In particular, Osama bin Laden really got his start because of the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. Now, one thing that was really interesting is bin Laden was never a fighter. He was never a guy who picked up an AK and was out shooting. He didn't do that. He was really good at raising money. He was a politician. And it was actually very fascinating because when you think of it, he just raised money. That was what he did. And he created Al-Qaeda essentially as what he called the base that would then send out fighters to fight jihad across the world, right? Whereas Mandela was very focused on one particular area and obviously didn't go more into the violent perspective. Now, let me give you a couple of other examples. Now, this is not going back to kind of ISIS, and a lot of my examples will go back to them because I have some really good resources from a project that I did years ago. Now, the guy on the left here is Jack Letts, also known as Jihadi Jack. Now, Jihadi Jack showed up in a number of Islamic State propaganda videos. If you kind of remember last week, we were talking about like, what is the legitimate, how do you define a country or a state? Remember, it's the one that has the legitimate use of force. Now, Jihadi Jack joined the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, and he spent a number of years there actually showing up very prominently on many of the English-speaking Islamic State videos that came out, including the most graphic, the most violent. Now, the people we'd ostensibly say Jihadi Jack, yes, is a terrorist. He, kind of has the joking nickname. However, the two individuals on the right are John Letts and Sally Lane. John Letts and Sally Lane are actually Jack's parents. They were not ostensibly aware of what Jack was doing when he left the country, but he called them while he was in Iraq and Syria and asked them for money because he was stuck somewhere. He didn't have any money. He couldn't buy food. They weren't really supporting him, and they wired him money. Well, the biggest question you'd have is, do you consider them to be terrorists? They technically provided financial support to a terrorist and a terrorist organization, but in most cases, they were just ultimately supporting their son that was trying to help them or trying to get their assistance for what he was to live, basically. So there's some kind of ambiguity around this, that when you actually think this through, you on one hand, you have a very well-known terrorist in Osama bin Laden, a very well-known freedom fighter and or political opposition leader, Nelson Mandela, who is a convicted terrorist according to the South African government. In this case, you have Jihadi Jack, who is a terrorist. He committed politically motivated violence against a population with a goal of essentially establishing the Islamic State. Then you just have John Letts and Sally Lane who are trying to help out their son. But they're convicted terrorists according to the British government because they financially supported Jack. So as you're going forward, think about the certain decisions that you made in your life and how they would impact you. And I'll kind of use a couple of personal stories of my own as we kind of move forward. Actually, I'll kind of start here. At one point in my life, I might have become Jihadi Jack, not the jihadi angle. When I was probably 13, 14 years old, I became very, very ingrained in internet culture. I played a lot of online games. I participated in a lot of kind of fringe communities. And some of those communities did start to have specific racial undertones, memes, jokes, things like that. And I kind of always stayed sort of on the periphery of it. But the more that I think back on it as an adult, I realized how close I was to that rabbit hole, how close I was going from being this kid just exploring the internet and seeing what was going to actually picking up a gun and doing something stupid. Because I was slowly coming into that realm. And it's terrifying now that I think about it. And I've come to this realization now, like in the last couple of years, that I was very, very close. And because of certain decisions that were made in my life, and me meeting certain people online who pulled me out of those communities, really benefited me in a lot more ways. Actually, one of my closest friends, he actually gave me a bunch of baby stuff when his son outgrew it. Him and I met playing video games. He lived 2 towns over, and we would meet, hang out, and go to dinner, get drinks together. Like we did that stuff together because we became friends. And he helped pull me out of that. But the more that I look back on it and see some of the communities I was starting to get involved in, the more likely, had I not met him and had I not gone a particular route, I would have gone deeper and deeper and deeper into those communities, and who knows what would have happened. But that particular moment in my life, that element of my life course, fundamentally changed things. So when you're thinking about your own life and you're thinking back on a lot of what you did and how you did it and why you did it, think about those decision points. Did you have moments in your life when you would have gone one way and it would have been dramatically different, whether for good or bad? For example, you could have had moments in your life when you go back and look and go, yeah, I screwed up and I went this way when I should have gone this way, right? But think of those moments when you pulled yourself out of that. What created that? Was it a social bond? Was it the fact that you had more of a specific moral or ethical compass that kind of drew you back out, right? And ironically, I went from being on this fringe community and kind of being very close to, and to be brutally honest, I was going down a white supremacist, white nationalist path. Very hardcore conservative, even extreme right, far right. That was where I was going. Not to say that it was right, and it took a lot of work and actually a number of years and exposure to various things before I was actually fully out of that. But again, the fact that a social connection helped drag me out of that and be like, dude, what are you doing? Was really helpful. So as you're going through this particular week and you're thinking about these topics, think about those moments in your life when you made decisions that impacted you. And maybe when you felt like all of a sudden, I shouldn't do this stuff anymore. I guarantee you, if you were having problems in your teens and now you're here and you're doing this, you probably stopped somewhere about 23 to 26. I'm just throwing a guess. If you pulled yourself out of it, because that's about generally the age people age out of committing most crimes. Generally that 18 to 25 is like the biggest range. And then generally that late stage is when they really stop. So just a kind of a point here. Now, I do have some interesting videos here. These videos that I will show you, where I have two of them, are actual Islamic State propaganda. These videos were filmed, produced, and distributed by the Islamic State in Iraq and Afghanistan, Iraq and Syria. There's nothing overtly graphic. There's nothing that will be like violent or anything like that. I've picked particular ones. This particular video is shot with a man named John Cantlie. Now, John Cantlie was a British photojournalist who was kidnapped in Iraq along with several other reporters who all, unfortunately, as of today, are deceased. As of today, we have not been able to confirm or deny that John Cantlie is alive. The last I heard, there were some fighters that came out of Iraq and Syria in around 2018, 2019 that claimed he escaped with much of the upper leadership of the Islamic State. John Cantlie started as a hostage, but when you watch these videos, think about the decisions that he may be making and the psychology behind why he's doing what he's doing. And we'll probably bring this up and chat about it again next week, but I'm just going to play this video and kind of have a little bit of a one-sided discussion with you guys as we kind of go forward from here. So I'm just going to turn off my camera to save bandwidth, and I will be back with you guys in a moment.
Hello, I'm John Cantlie, and today we're at Mosul University. Or at least what's left of Mosul University. If you look behind me, you'll see it's pretty much been completely smashed to pieces. Now, the strike was about 3 months ago, about 9 o'clock in the morning, and as we've driven onto the campus from around the corner here, I've counted at least 6 huge explosions. I think there must be a lot more. And these are big bombs. We're talking 2,000 pounders here. The university is next to one of the busiest streets in all of Mosul. The shopping street and the market district is literally just the other side of the main gates over there. 103 people were injured in the strike, 15 were killed. Now, the level of destruction is absolutely massive. Now, Mosul University was the finest and biggest university in all of Iraq. Now, if it was a military hardpoint, if it was a weapons cache, or if it was being used as a training ground by the Mujahideen, perhaps you could understand. But it was simply Mosul's, and in fact Iraq's, finest university, now reduced to a huge pile of rubble. And you have to ask yourself why. You have to ask yourself, why did the coalition decide to destroy the university? No one here knows. If you ask them why, they'll say, we don't know. We don't know. The normal social everyday life had been completely destroyed. And you have to ask yourself, if you're going to destroy a university, why bother? This is the Yabasat district of Mosul. It's a very normal region, normal people live here. And a stick of bombs, looks like, I don't know, 4 or 5 large bombs again, not as big as...
So I'm just going to kind of leave it there. When you look at this man, are you thinking that he's a hostage? Or are you thinking that he is absolutely collaborating with the Islamic State to produce, film, and disseminate these videos? Now, from every bit of evidence that I've seen when we're talking about this particular subject and why people do what they do, John Cantley's demeanor, attitude, voice inflection never really change in any of the videos he's in. He always kind of has this like halfway upbeat attitude. He's a very good filmmaker. He's a presenter, right? He's good at this. He's a professor, right? I can be having the crappiest day, come in here, flip a switch, and I'm perfectly fine, right? I have that attitude about me. I have that way of being able to do it, that I don't let things that are going on back here in my work life, in my family life, bother me. For example, just before I sat down here, my son was screaming his head off. I have a headache. I'm very annoyed, yet I can still flip that switch. I'm still here. Nothing, right? But you do notice something about his physicality. Over time, as you're watching more and more of his videos, which I've watched all of them, I believe, he slowly becomes thinner and thinner. You start to see that his hair becomes longer and longer. He starts looking a little more disheveled. And he starts looking a little worse for wear. He doesn't move as much in later videos. So you can kind of see there's probably things going on in the background, right? There's a root cause reason why he's chosen to do this. Now, he may have chosen to do this because they either gave him this option or gave him the option they would kill him. Possibly behead him on camera and spread that over the internet. Right? All very possible. So Cantlie is making a very calculated decision. He's weighing the costs and benefits of his actions, knowing if I continue to do this and I stall as long as I can and I make myself valuable to this organization insofar as just producing propaganda and saying what they want him to say, he stays alive. Now, think back when you actually start thinking about like criminality and life course. If you grew up in a neighborhood or grew up in an area where you didn't have a lot of options and you were either told you either join us or you're a victim of us, you might lean toward joining just so you don't become the victim, right? Cantlie is taking a very similar approach, and there's a very deep psychology around this that's really important to kind of think about. Now, when we start kind of talking about terrorism, there's a series of events, generally speaking, when we actually kind of cover this in particular. Generally speaking, you have facilitators, precipitants, which then lead to terrorism, right? Not always this linear. It definitely jumps up and down, kind of shifts around, things change. A facilitator are certain conditions that can result in a particular emphasis on violence. Poverty, unemployment rates, lack of education, lack of job opportunities. Like all of these factors can go into it. Fear about, and in my case, as a potential white nationalist in my youth, it was fear of immigration, fear of the unknown, fear of others, right? That's what drew me when I first started. And I'm being very honest with you guys. That this is my past. I didn't do anything. I never really engaged with the communities. In specifically, I was never like, yeah, Aryan Brotherhood. I know a lot of the slang and terminology because I studied it, but I also knew it because I was involved in some way with it and kind of did a little bit of my own research. But in particular, facilitators are characteristics. There are things going on. They're kind of like those basic statistics and information that always show that a neighborhood or an area is a problem, right? Per se, quote unquote problem. Then you have a precipitant. Now, a precipitant is usually a particular incident or a series of particular incidents that result in widespread anger, frustration, and generally speaking, aggression that elicit a response. So, for example, let me take the rise of Nazi Germany. Oh, this is a really kind of a good example for this particular pattern. Germany went to war in World War I. Adolf Hitler served in the German army in World War I. He was exposed to the horrors of war, and when Germany lost the First World War, the German government was put under such tight reparations and restrictions by the Allied forces, so France, England, the US, etc., that their economy went into a tailspin. There's some pretty famous photos of like people burning wheelbarrows full of money to stay warm in Germany because their currency was worth nothing. It was cheaper to burn money than to use that money to buy wood to burn or coal to burn for warmth. It was cheaper just to shovel money into a furnace. Now, these characteristics led to a society where you had a large group of young men coming up under this oppressive system with no job opportunities, no nationalist like feelings of unity. You know, when you think of like the US post World War I, you have the 1920s, the flapper years, right? These are like the swing and like very good areas. Cities were hopping, like that was, things were going well in the US. We had a lot of expendable money. We did a lot of really good things. Yeah, we had the Great Depression and it lasted, but for the most part, things were actually okay in the US. Whereas in Germany, they were awful. Like it was Great Depression level times 100 for much longer. Now, what ended up happening is that as we get into the early 30s, Adolf Hitler rose to prominence as a political figure. He used this lack of national unity and this in his way of speaking to engage large groups of people and get them to want to unify, to rebuild Germany, right? To rebuild the country. Now, his precipitant in particular was that the fact that the government wouldn't do anything against the reparations. They wouldn't try to fight against them. They wouldn't try to get out from under them. And he used that as an excuse to basically pay someone who was one of his like underlings to bomb the German parliament. He used that as an excuse to gain power and then engage in warfare to reunify and expand Germany, right? Which we all know how that went. It ended up as another split country for 40 years. So generally speaking, that's kind of the pattern that you see. Now, this other video, and then we'll probably wrap up shortly hereafter. I'm not going to keep you guys very long because obviously, if you're taking notes as we're talking, great. But if you're, since everybody's going to do the alternative assignment for this particular week, I want to give you the last 10 or 15 minutes to be able to finish it, submit it. So that way you didn't spend more than the hour that you would have spent with me on Sunday evening. All right. I think that's kind of a good trade-off for our kind of engagement tonight. So again, I'm going to turn my camera off. I'm going to play this video and then we'll come back and chat about it.
إلى أن ضمني بلد تسامى بشرع الله ميمون.
So I'm just going to point something out. These are not actual people. All right. This is shot in a video game. This is actually shot in Grand Theft Auto 5. So just keep that in mind as we're going through this video.
الجناب تنفست الحشى الصعداء لما شممت أريجها بعد العذاب شممت أريجها بعد العذاب إلى أن ضمني بلد تسامى بشرع الله ميمون الجناب تنفست الحشى الصعداء لما شممت أريجها بعد العذاب شممت أريجها بعد العذاب.
Just think through how appealing this is to a generation of gaming connected youth and those that are seeking a place in society and a way to have a global impact, right? this can incentivize people to do things because, oh, I don't have to go and kill people. I can do stuff here. I can get really good with technology, take down power grids and do things like that. They use this as an incentive, as a way to gain international support for what they're doing. And just again, imagine the decisions that people make. They see this and they start thinking it through. I don't have to be that person. I don't have to do this, but I can do this other thing and have just as much of an impact. It really, really, really creates this kind of environment where you kind of have to have a discussion and think through the decisions that are made, right? All right. Now, when we start talking about profiling, it gets a little bit iffy. A lot of scholars that look at terrorism, in particular look at extreme and violent groups and want to learn how did people get here, why did they get here, they start to really actually talk to people. There's a couple of really great books. If anybody's interested, let me know. I give you some recommendations on books, particularly for the far right, and a couple on the Islamic State. I know a few people who did stuff on the IRA in Northern Ireland, including interviewing them. A former professor of mine actually did his PhD, and his dissertation was on the psychology of the IRA. And he actually went to Northern Ireland and met with high-ranking leaders of the IRA during the height of the violence. And as he said to me, he said, they made me fly to 4 different countries. He was in London. They made him fly from like London to Munich, Munich to Spain, to like Barcelona, Barcelona to Paris, Paris to Belfast. So he couldn't be tracked and traced as they did it. And when he got to Belfast, he was picked up by a just nondescript looking van. And when he got in, they had him sit in the back, and he realized that he was actually sitting next to the head bomb maker for the IRA. That he had known that this man had been personally responsible for multiple bombings that killed dozens of people. Like, he was like, but as he said, he goes, I really thought there was going to be something that was going to stick out to me. But in most cases, there really isn't. It's kind of weird, right? You start wondering, is it a fragmented identity? Are they just looking for something to do, a sense of belonging? Is it an overstimulation? Is there some kind of emotional detachment from things, right? There's a lot that's going on, right? But what we actually find in most cases, it's really overgeneralized, right? We don't know enough about the individual level is so specific that why someone commits a crime and why someone doesn't can be very broad, right? That decision-making can sometimes be just a flip of a switch. They make a decision in that moment to do X, right? Or it can be what we call reductionism, which is also kind of like trying to relate all criminals, all terrorists onto one single factor. It doesn't work that way. No matter what you do, you'll find that almost anybody is something different, something unique, that there's a particular reason why they didn't. And it's not really realistic to do this. What we do find, in fact, most of the most well-known terrorists are normal. They grew up in a normal house with a normal set of parents. They went to a normal school. They had a normal life. Think of every time you've heard about like a mass shooting and they say, well, it was this person. And like, oh, I can see that, but it also surprises me. Like, they all kind of had this weird inclination, but in fact, they blended in with everybody else. And that's what we find with fighters, with all of these people, that they're not necessarily indoctrinated. So let me rephrase that. They're not indoctrinated when they join. Generally speaking, they're not indoctrinated until after. Some of the best research on the American far right actually shows that the overwhelming majority of like skinheads and white supremacists, they don't actually hold racist beliefs until after they join an organization. They join the organization because of social connections, sense of belonging, wanting friends, and they join these groups out of that. I can tell you that's why I sought some of these groups out. I was a very isolated kid. I didn't go a lot. I didn't have a ton. I had a lot of friends. I didn't have any close friends. I was the kind of kid that could move between social groups very easily, rebuild my demeanor for that group, develop a certain attitude like that group, interact with them very well, and then leave and completely swap my perception for another group that I would then go to. So I needed a sense of belonging. I sought that out in video games, sought that out in the internet. Right. And I bumped into some people who could have pushed me down this road. And now I didn't start to develop any of these kind of thoughts or ideologies. But what I did start to do is start to realize where I was going. And then honestly, what really kind of drew me out of this, and I'm just going to close out my thing here. What really drew me out of that particular area when we're talking about why did I choose to leave or why did I leave, is because I developed other more positive social connections. My life changed, my life evolved. I went to college, I got involved with, I was actually a resident advisor for 4 years, so I'm sure at some point we'll get to some crazy stories that I have. I have dozens of ridiculous stories of either stuff that college students did or their friends did, or give you a good example. Let's just say that I once had to call 911 because a student was high on acid and he attempted to sexually assault a girl. And we didn't find out this until after. We only found out that there was somebody acting strangely. We didn't really, I just realized my camera's all, yeah, find me. Okay. There we go, that's better. We didn't actually find out this until later. We just knew that there was something going on. Somebody said somebody was acting weird. And we went down and he was all hyped up, like just jacked up. And I had to like literally run with him and like jump up and down and be like, hey, what's your name? And that was the only way I could get his attention. And we called the police because we really thought something was seriously wrong, that like he was going to have an overdose on something or was going to freak out. And he actually ended up attempting to assault a police officer, got maced, got strapped to a stretcher and a spit mask put on him, and then wheeled out of the 18-story building. So I had to run from the 12th floor or the 11th floor down to the first and literally clear the lobby and give the police and the EMS a direct line out of the building. But again, I found out later when I actually met this kid after he was done off the drugs, he was actually had an intellectual disability. He was actually had autism. And his thing that he said to me was, he goes, I take drugs so I feel things. And that really hit me, because the reality is in most cases, criminals are doing things because they want some kind of a rush, a reaction. They're not necessarily doing it for money. They're not doing it for this. They want the thrill of getting away with it, right? So this is kind of a big factor that goes into that. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to finish up here. We've been going for about 40 minutes. I'll give you guys the last 20 so you can just do the alternative reaction. If you guys have questions about this, please let me know. We'll probably bring it up next week or a week from Sunday. So that would be Sunday's the 2nd. That'd be the 9th. So we'll talk about it on the 9th. We'll watch that particular video that I was going to watch last week with you guys. So I hope you all have a great rest of your week. Feel free to watch this whenever you can. I'm gonna end this right now, and then I'm gonna post an announcement and then email everybody. So if you end up watching this on tonight, Friday, Saturday night, Sunday, Monday, it doesn't matter. Just get it in by the deadline for the regular assignment. All right. I hope you guys all have a great weekend, a great week, and I will talk to you next Sunday.